I've been teaching stiff adults how to become more flexible for many years. And about 3 years back, I became maybe a little too passionate about climbing. A few minor pulley injuries later, I now have a healthy relationship with it. And for me, these two worlds, flexibility and climbing, constantly collide. Seems like at least once per session, someone won't be flexible enough to make a move on the wall, and they'll go, "Oh, guess I should stretch more." Well, maybe you should. Now, I'm a big fan of the climbing YouTube community. I get just as stoked as anyone if Emil and Lattice does a collaboration video.
Exciting stuff.
But with my background, I do feel like I have something unique to add to the conversation. And one big distinction I would make is that becoming more flexible as an adult takes different techniques because our bodies aren't as pliable as they once were. Spoiler alert, hopping straight into middle splits and pancakes is probably not what you need. So if you feel like your flexibility limits you on the wall, or you just want to take your mobility to the next level, let's dive in. First, let's talk about the best stretches to gain raw flexibility, and then we'll go over some drills that will help you apply that flexibility to the wall. One of the biggest limitations for adult climbers is obviously groin flexibility. The simplest and quickest way to start working on this is the butterfly stretch. We are going to use some weight here. Start with some light dumbbells, and then over a few sessions, explore going heavier. You'll end up finding a weight that allows you to go the deepest. Too light and you won't overcome the stiffness in the groins, but too heavy, you'll reflexively tighten up and you won't actually be able to relax into the stretch. Start sitting with your back against the wall and feet as close to your hips as you can get them. If you have trouble even getting into this position, then prop your hips up with some pillows or yoga blocks. Set the weights on your knees. I prefer using a contract relax method with this one. So you're gonna pull up against the weights for 5 seconds, turning on the muscles you intend to stretch, then relax into the stretch for 5 to 10 seconds. Allow the weights to pull the knees closer to the ground. And you can even think about activating your glutes and rotators on the backside of your hips to actively pull the knees closer to the ground. And then you're gonna repeat this 5 times. Many people see some pretty quick results here. So if you end up getting your knees to the ground, no worries, there's still more for you. Start widening the feet by putting yoga blocks between your feet, and then the stretch will continue to get harder. Easily overlooked is the necessity for lots of internal rotation of the hip, or when the knee faces inwards. Think opposite of a butterfly stretch. Internal rotation is obviously important for these big drop knees on the wall, but it's actually directly related to how easily you can pull your knees towards your chest. Think like pistol squat. To work on this, we'll get into a 90-90 position, one leg in front and one leg in back. We're working on this back leg that's in internal rotation. Now we're gonna plant this back hand out here. You're gonna push through that back foot to lift your hips up as high as you can. Now your goal here is to keep tension to that back foot and then sit this hip as close to the ground as possible, driving into more internal rotation. And for extra, you can even start to reach this hand backwards, and that'll pull you into more internal rotation. Just make sure to keep some tension through that back foot and do this for 10 reps. Most climbing flexibility videos put a huge emphasis on the pancake, but I think the benefits of the pancake may be a bit overstated. The pancake stretches a combination of 2 major muscle groups, the groins and the hamstrings. But if you have really stiff hamstrings, you're never gonna stretch your groins here. And to be quite honest, you can be an elite level climber and not have amazing hamstring flexibility. Sorry to pick on you, Emil, but check out his standing forward fold.
Yeah, that's as far as I'm gonna get.
The juice is in the hip position, the ability to bring the knees behind the torso. It's the same in a deep squat as it is in a pancake. We just take the hamstrings out of the equation. Strict pancake flexibility only comes up in unique situations where you have your hip in that position, but then your knee also needs to be straight, like moving into high heels or toes, or getting into big stem movements. So I think a better option for most of us is just training a deep, wide squat. I personally don't do any training for my pancake. I just do the stretches in this video, plus some hamstring stretching, and my pancake keeps progressing. So to set up for this, we're gonna go into a squat that's slightly wider than you feel comfortable with, but we wanna take the ankles out of the equation, so I recommend some heel lifts, just because we wanna be able to pull the torso forward in this position, so you have to feel comfortable. Now the stretch is simple. We're just gonna place the elbows on the insides of the knees and pry the knees open, driving the torso forward, pulling the hips down towards the ground. It can be helpful to generate some leverage by using the hands in different positions to help you really pry
open. Now we're gonna be here for 60 seconds, and over those 60 seconds, you're gonna continue to try to widen your knees as much as possible.
Now, don't get me wrong, the pancake is still very useful. So if you want to work on the pancake, keep working on that deep wide squat, and then start working on your hamstring flexibility with a single leg good morning. And if you want a full deep dive into the pancake, check the video link somewhere on the screen. The truest expression of what most vertical wall climbing requires is to keep your hips flush to the wall. So it's essentially a middle split. But most adult climbers aren't ready to just hop into middle split training, nor do I think you need it. Now, where most people start is the frog stretch, but the frog stretch is really limited by the amount of leverage that you can generate on the groins to actually open them. There's two ways to overcome this. First, the frog stretch done with some weight on the pelvis and sliders under the knees can help generate enough leverage to start prying open those muscles. Start with something like 10 to 25 pounds, and you should be there for a good 60 to 90 seconds.
Option 2, which is my personal preference, is a hand assistance horse stance. To set up, we're gonna go into a wide stance. You'll need to play around with the stance, and that'll be dictated upon how at your max stretch, how deep you can go. You want your hips to be slightly above your knees. If your hips can drop lower than your knees, then you need to widen out. Now from here, we're gonna place the hands on the knees. We're gonna use that leverage to drive the knees open as you sit your hips down towards the ground. Same thing as the squat. We'll be here for 60 seconds, and over that 60 seconds, you're trying to widen the knees and lower the hips. And if you ever find that you're too low, widen out your feet again.
It kind of goes without saying that you need a lot of ankle range of motion to drop the heels when smearing. Now, stretching your calves is pretty simple. I'm sure a quick YouTube search will bring up all the best stretches. But a lot of adults with really stiff ankles run into blocking in the front of the ankle, so you can't actually get a good calf stretch because there's an obstruction there. If that's you, then try this. Place your toes up against something vertical so that your toes are completely extended. Now drive your knee forward and then move from dropping the knee inwards to pulling the knee back outwards. If you're doing it right, you'll probably feel some crazy sensations on the lower part of your calf. Do this for about 60 seconds on each side. Now, it may not be noticeable, but being able to open your hip backwards actually matters on the wall quite a bit. You want to be able to keep your down leg straight while lifting the other foot. To do this, most people need to stretch their quads and the hip flexors. Here's the best choice. We'll go into a conventional wall quad stretch with your foot up against the wall behind you, and then bring the other leg up. Now, the main difference is we're not gonna solely focus on trying to get the shoulders to move back towards the wall. We're actually gonna work on driving the hips down towards the ground first, and then from that stretched position, we're gonna open up backwards towards the wall. And then we'll move between these two positions, getting the deepest stretch possible in each for 5 to 10 seconds, and then repeat this 5 times. And I will say, once you get to a decent level with all of these stretches, you should start exploring the middle split and pancake. Okay, the stretches were all about gaining raw flexibility. This next section is movements that will teach your body how to use that newfound flexibility on the wall. The first and probably the best is the horse stance Cossack squat. Now, we already talked about the horse stance. The only difference is we're not using the hands for assistance now. You actually have to generate the force to open your hips on your own. Now let's talk about the Cossack squat. It's essentially a side squat from this wide position. Now, the magic here is you're getting a deep squat on one side, but on the other side, you're getting kind of a middle split or pancake-like position. When you're doing your Cossack squat, be sure to only go as deep as you can while still keeping your hips open. We don't want to see the knee collapsing inwards. That puts a lot of stress on the knee. And try to keep your torso as vertical as possible in all directions, so not a huge forward lean, but also if you find yourself shifting your rib cage in a direction, you're probably trying to avoid something in your hips. Now here's the drill. We're gonna combine these two movements, the horse stance and Cossack. So you're gonna start in your best horse stance position, and then you'll move into a Cossack squat on one side. Then coming back out, you're gonna transition through your lowest hip position while going to the other side. I'd recommend doing 5 reps on each side, but the goal is to move as slow and controlled as possible. One thing that can be really advantageous here is actually using a little bit of weight. It could help push you into deeper positions, but also gives you a little bit of counterbalance that might encourage you to go a little deeper. Now, to take this one step further, we can even add in some drop knee practice here. When you're at your deepest Cossack squat position, you drop that knee inwards towards the ground, and then lift back out. Now, if your internal rotation isn't very good, I would not recommend this. Keep working on those 90-90s that we talked about earlier. But if you think you're ready, just use your hands for assistance however you can to unload the position and practice dropping the knee in. The difference between passive and active flexibility has become common knowledge, so I'm not gonna bore you with it here. This 90-90 movement is all about active flexibility.
Being able to lift your foot high enough in any direction is a common sticking point for most climbers. Now, in a lot of climbing videos, they'll show things like deep lunge lift-offs or fire hydrants, but this one exercise can consolidate all your efforts into one movement. So this is the active 90-90 transition. We'll hop back in our 90-90 position. Now our goal is to keep the knees as close to the torso as you can, while also keeping them as wide as you can as we transition from side to side, from 90-90 on one side to 90-90 on the other. Now, to start out, you're gonna use a lot of hand assistance and lean back for this, but to progress, you're gonna try and use less hand assistance or potentially none at all.
Deep squats are great for flexibility, but on the wall, most often you're pushing through your toes unless you're smearing.
So to drill keeping your hips open while pushing through your toes, we'll steal something from ballet, the plie and plie. We'll start by angling out the feet. Only angle out the feet as wide as you can also keep the knees traveling over the toes. If your knees are inside your toes, it's not gonna feel great on the knees. Now, we start by lifting onto the toes and gripping the ground with the toes to mimic actually climbing. And then we open the hips, keep the torso vertical, and sit as deep as possible, staying up on those toes, gripping the ground, and then stand back up. And if that feels really easy, you simply widen out your feet, and eventually you'll find something that feels really challenging for the hips.
Now let's be real, only climbing can lead to some pretty big imbalances in the body. The ones I see most are stiff lats, upper backs, and biceps. To counteract this, I'd highly recommend doing these 2 stretches. The butcher block. Take a stick or a weight and then place your elbows on a bench. Drive your shoulders forward and down towards the ground while pulling the hands towards your back. Do this for at least 60 seconds. To stretch the biceps, a simple crab lift is the best. Sit on your butt, place your hands by your side, and then just lift your hips up and push into the ground. All right, so let's talk about programming. How are you gonna fit all this into your training? For the stretches, I'd choose 3 or 4 that you really wanna focus on. You could do all 6, but those sessions may turn into hour-long sessions. Honestly, I think the best time to do your mobility is before you climb, so your body feels open and you can actually use your new mobility on the wall. So do 2 to 3 sets of your stretches while you're warming up your fingers and your upper body. Then do 1 to 2 sets of the movement mobility drills, and then go hit the wall. You should try to do this at least 2 times a week. And then when you're done with your session, go and do that butcher's block and that crab lift to undo some of those imbalances that you may have created while climbing. Now, I'm always learning, so I'd love to hear from the climbing community. What stretches or mobility drills would you add to this list? All right, guys, thanks for watching. See you next time.